Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today is Tuesday, January 20th, 2026. And if you just, to take a look at your phone, look at the date. We are exactly, to the day, 1 year into the second term of this administration.
1 year.
And honestly, if you're feeling a little exhausted, you are definitely not alone.
I think exhausted is probably the right word. The start to this year has been incredibly dense.
It's the velocity of it, right? I mean, just think about what we've processed since New Year's.
Right.
You had the Venezuela raid just 2 weeks ago, which we're still seeing footage from. Then the Greenland ultimatum.
Which you have to admit, at first it sounded like a typo.
Totally. And that was followed immediately by those new targeted tariffs. And then the real bombshell on January 7th.
Withdrawing from 66 international organizations.
In a single day.
It was a systematic dismantling.
Exactly. And if you open any op-ed page right now, the narrative is pretty much locked in. The pundits are screaming chaos.
Impulsive, erratic. That's what you hear.
Right. That is the flailing of a leader who just wants to break things. But today, we're going to pivot. We're going to look at a perspective that says, stop looking at the personality.
And start looking at the math.
Yeah.
That is the goal. We're doing a deep dive into a paper that was released just this morning by Fareed Novin in the Global Review.
And the title is Strategic Rationality Under Asymmetric Power. Strategic rationality. That's a bold claim, considering the last month.
It is bold, but Novin's whole thesis is that we are suffering from what he calls personality reductionism.
Okay.
We see the tweets, the angry press conferences, and we just assume it's madness. But Novin argues that if you strip away all that noise and you look at it from a pure game theory perspective, this isn't chaos.
It's a strategy.
It is a highly calculated algorithm designed for a very specific board setup, what he calls an asymmetric game.
All right, let's get into the mechanics here. Because when people hear game theory, they usually think of, abstract economics, not tanks and tariffs.
Yeah.
What is the fundamental game the administration is playing, according to Novin?
The entire foundation is what he calls asymmetric power, combined with escalation dominance.
Okay, break that down.
We all know the U.S. is powerful, military, finance, you name it. But the key variable here isn't just strength, it's dependency.
Right.
Novin argues that in 2026, the United States is just significantly less dependent on the global system.
Then the global system is on the United States.
Precisely.
But I have to push back on that a little. We live in a globalized world. Supply chains, energy. I mean, if Europe crashes, doesn't the U.S. economy tank right along with it?
That's the conventional wisdom for sure. It's what kept the peace for decades. But Novin's data suggests that equation has shifted.
So?
Between domestic energy independence, the reshoring of critical manufacturing, and just the sheer size of our own consumer market, the U.S. has what bargaining theorists call a superior outside option.
Explain that term, outside option.
Okay, think of it like a salary negotiation. If you need that job to pay your mortgage, you ask for a raise politely. You have no leverage.
Right.
But if you have another signed offer in your pocket for double the pay, and you are perfectly happy to walk out that door, you don't ask.
You demand, because you can survive the breakup.
Exactly. Novin's argument is that the U.S. is the only player at the table right now with a credible other job. The administration has calculated that if they flip the whole table, the U.S. might get a broken nose.
But Europe gets a heart attack.
Europe and the emerging markets, yes.
And that confidence, that ability to walk away, that drives the whole strategy. Which brings us to January 7th, the bonfire of the treaties, withdrawing from 66 organizations. To me, and I think to a lot of people, that just looked like a tantrum.
It looks like a tantrum if you still value the relationship, yes.
Yeah.
But in game theory, this is a classic move. It's called commitment weakening. If you are bound by rules and polite diplomatic norms, your threats aren't really that scary. Your opponents know you'll stop at the red light because you always stop at the red light.
So you have to run the red light just to prove you're willing to do it.
You have to prove you're unconstrained. It's like the old tactic of burning your own ships when you land on an enemy shore.
So there's no retreat.
Right. Your soldiers know they have to fight. When the administration pulled out of those organizations, they were burning the ships of polite diplomacy. They were signaling to the world, we have removed the guardrails. We are willing to let the system collapse.
So if you want to save it,
you have to pay the price. It makes the threat credible. The logic isn't, I am crazy. The logic is, I am so powerful and so unconstrained that your safest option is to just give me what I want.
Let's see how that translated into actual force. The report pivots from that to the military operation in Venezuela on January 3rd.
The operation to capture Maduro,
It was intense. I mean, 150 aircraft, special forces, the videos of those transport planes over Caracas were everywhere. But what was the point? We've had tension with Venezuela for years. Why then?
Because, according to Novin, it wasn't really about Venezuela.
It wasn't.
The objective was capturing Maduro, sure, but the target audience wasn't Caracas. It was Berlin, Paris, and Beijing.
Okay.
It was the kinetic enforcement of the Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine from the new national security strategy.
Hemispheric consolidation. That was the phrase.
Exactly. It was a demonstration of that escalation dominance. You can't invade France, right? But you need them to fear you. So you find a weaker state, Venezuela, and you use overwhelming, very theatrical force.
You show the world you're not bluffing. The tanks actually roll.
And that brings us to Greenland.
It does.
Yeah.
Because how do you take that military credibility and, turn it into money? The Greenland story is where it gets strange.
The Greenland ultimatum.
I have to admit, when I saw that headline, U.S. links tariffs to Greenland purchase, I thought it was an old meme.
We all did.
But then on January 17th, it was real policy. 10% tariffs on 8 NATO allies, explicitly tied to buying the island.
And this is maybe the clearest example of what Nevin calls extreme anchoring.
Walk us through that.
In any negotiation, anchoring is about setting the initial terms. If I want you to pay 5% of your GDP for defense, and I start by asking for 5%, we'll haggle and end up at 3%.
Right. Standard negotiation.
What if I start the conversation by demanding you sell me a massive strategic part of your sovereign territory?
And threaten to destroy your economy if you don't.
Exactly. Suddenly, that demand for 5% defense spending doesn't seem like an outrage.
It looks like a relief. It looks like the sane compromise.
You got it. Acquiring Greenland is secondary. The primary payoff is shifting the entire bargaining range. They make the radical seem moderate.
It's psychological warfare with trade deals. And speaking of trade, we have to talk about the tariffs, because the numbers in this report are just staggering.
They are historic. We haven't seen anything like this since the 1930s.
The report says that in 2025, the average U.S. tariff hit 27% at its peak. It's settled down to around 16.8% now, but the revenue.
It's massive.
We went from collecting $100 billion in tariffs in 2024 to nearly $300 billion in 2025.
A huge transfer of wealth. But Novin says we can't look at these as just, taxes to protect steelworkers. They're dynamic punishment mechanisms.
That sounds ominous.
It is, in a way. Trade is a repeated game. You interact over and over. If you want to change someone's behavior, you need a way to punish them immediately and painfully.
Right.
Remember when the Court of International Trade tried to block the first wave of tariffs last year?
I do. The administration appealed right away.
They didn't just appeal, they escalated. They raised the rates while the appeal was pending. And then just last week, January 14th, we got the new 25% tariff on AI chips.
Which feels incredibly aggressive. But here's the thing that I don't get. Why didn't Europe or China just walk away? Why not decouple?
Because they ran the math, and the administration knew they would. Novin calls this reaction function exploitation. The U.S. had better information about the Allies' pain threshold. Novin quotes Ursula von der Leyen admitting Europe went back to sleep after the first term. They're still dependent on the U.S. consumer.
So when the tariffs hit, they had no cards to play.
Zero. The UK accepted a 10% baseline tariff. And China, this is the really telling part, they actually slashed their retaliatory tariffs down to 10% back in May.
Wait, China lowered their own tariffs in a trade war?
Unilaterally. They realized they had more to lose in a full-blown economic conflict. They tried to buy peace.
It's like playing poker with someone who can see your hand and knows you can't afford to lose.
That's a perfect analogy. And that leverage is what got them the biggest win mentioned in the paper. The Hague Summit in June 2025.
The NATO breakthrough.
It changed the alliance forever. For decades, the target was 2%. At The Hague, under all this pressure, the new target was codified at 5%.
5%. That's an enormous amount of money.
It's projected to take European defense spending from about $350 billion to $550 billion by 2030. Estonia and Lithuania are already there. And the report is clear. This wasn't some happy consensus. The Polish foreign minister is quoted saying this was impossible without the leadership, and you have to read that as coercion of the president.
But I want to pause on that,
Yeah.
because the report digs into the role Congress played here. Congress passed that provision in the NDAA that forbade the president from pulling out of NATO.
Right.
At the time, that was framed as Congress stopping the president.
Yeah.
But Novin suggests something else was going on.
He calls it the good cop, bad cop dynamic on a constitutional level.
How so?
So, did Congress constrain the president? Formally, yes. They mandated keeping troops in Europe, but the administration knew Congress would do that. Novin argues they counted on it.
So they could make the threat.
They could make the threat of withdrawal terrify the Europeans into paying 5% while knowing there was a safety net. They could scream, "We are leaving," to get the money, fully aware that Congress wouldn't actually let the alliance collapse.
It's a bluff backed by an insurance policy. It's incredibly cynical.
Cynical or rationally optimal, the U.S. got maximum value without paying the cost of actually destroying NATO.
They got the money and kept the troops. But at what cost here at home? I mean, we can admire the game theory, but that $300 billion in tariff revenue that's paid by importers and consumers.
And Novin is very clear on that. The strategy has a price tag. The paper estimates the tariffs cost the average U.S. household about $1,500 this year.
That's real pain.
It is. And that's the risk. If growth stagnates, that $1,500 hit becomes a political time bomb. This whole strategy requires the U.S. economy to be bulletproof.
If cracks appear, the leverage disappears.
Exactly. Because voters will demand a stop to the pain.
There's another distinction in the report I found interesting about who this strategy targets. It seems to work on allies in weaker states like Venezuela. But what about China?
Ah, yes. This is where the madman theory finds its limit. Novin calls it coercion for the weak, negotiation for the strong.
Meaning the U.S. can't just bully China.
The power gap isn't wide enough. You can dictate terms to Venezuela. You can pressure Europe. But with a peer competitor like China, the strategy shifts. It's transactional.
And the proof is?
The report notes that despite all the tough talk, the president has 4 face-to-face meetings scheduled with Xi Jinping this year.
4. That's more than with any G7 leader.
It is. The goal isn't submission. It's to carve up the map. It's 19th century great power politics. You beat up the little guys, then you sit down with the other big guy to decide who gets what.
So if you're Germany or Japan, what's the lesson? Novin's conclusion felt bleak for the allies.
It's a wake-up call. He says the allies have been operating on a false assumption for years. They thought this administration was an aberration.
And that normality would just return.
Exactly. That the U.S. would go back to being the benevolent protector. Novin says that's a fantasy. The math has changed. The U.S. has realized it can charge rent for the global order.
Rent for the global order. That's a haunting phrase.
And it's going to keep raising the rent until the tenants either move out or, build their own house.
So bringing it all back, we look at the chaos of the last year. And what this deep dive suggests is that we need to stop asking, is this crazy? And start understanding that it's a calculated, rational, and very dangerous leverage of power.
It's a strategy that accepts volatility as the price for dominance.
So here's the thought I want to leave everyone with. It's the Pandora's box question Novin asks at the very end. This strategy, as ugly as it is, gets results on the balance sheet.
$300 billion in revenue. NATO spending skyrocketing.
So, regardless of who wins the next election, will any future president go back to the old way? If you know you can get the money by flipping the table, why would you ever go back to politely following the rules?
Once you realize you have the power to break the rules and profit from it, it's very, very hard to put the rules back together again.
That might be the true legacy of 2026. Not the chaos itself, but the proof that chaos pays. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.
Stay safe out there.
We'll see you next time.